All right, we're live. What's up, YouTube? It's good to be back after being away for a minute. Welcome to Dr. K's Maker Mayhem. We're going to be talking about uh, design for production, how to use some 3D processes to make something in the real world. If you've been at this channel for a minute, it used to be called Z Fever. Then I changed it to the Art Hack, and now I'm at Dr. K's Maker Mayhem. It's a process, okay? I think we're going to set this for a minute. So, let's drop the logo and get into ZBrush. Hopefully, the music isn't too terribly loud. If you didn't even hear it at all. And if there is an issue, please say something. All right, so today we're going to be, it's going to be a quick one. We're just going to go over some simple stuff inside of ZBrush and some thought processes in terms of how to work on a production piece. And by production, I mean, that can mean a lot of things, because production in toys versus production in video games versus production in film, and anywhere else that you go are all going to be different pipelines, different things to think about. What we're going to be talking about is design for manufacturing effectively. And in terms of what we're going to be making today, we're going to be looking at how to turn a character into, say, a water slide for kids, because that's what I do in my day-to-day work. I concept, and then I turn concepts into real-world products. All right. If you hear some kid crying in the background, it's because my kid got his Switch grounded or something. So, let's see. So we had a customer come through, and this is typically how it goes. 1 second. So, sorry about that. So when we get requests, sometimes I get clients from all over the place. They'll want things that are, sometimes jungle themed, sometimes they want safari theme. Sometimes they're not really sure exactly what it is that they're looking for, but the process is kind of the same. In my field, you kind of have to use the 3D generalist approach to things. So one day I'll be concepting, one day I'll be modeling, the next day I'll be refining something for production. Sometimes I might be going back and doing revisions on things that have existed as a concept for decades, right? And that's what you run into. So when you're working in production, sometimes things have not so good documentation, and it's up to you to try and figure out how to manage those things. So, this particular project, I had a client, they want something involving a toucan and something involving a jungle theme, and they want both a water slide and they want some sort of spout that sprays some water. So we're designing something for a kid's splash pad effectively, or actually it's going to go into like a kid's like a zero entry swimming pool. So what we're going to do is we are going to take this design and we're going to make it work with something that is a little more realistic. And this is what you're going to run into if you happen to work with something that is in the real world. You go through, you make your design, and then you have to make it fit around something that actually exists, right? So I had to take this design. Let's hop back over here. So I had to take this design, which is the kind of the original concept, um, and then I needed to fit it more so around something that can actually be turned into a water slide. As you can see, the beak has to be wider than it was um, because there's certain things that have to be accounted for. When you're making something like a water slide, you got to have a space for, you know, the slide to actually exist. And if I had kept the original design, then it would have obliterated pretty much the majority of the character, right? And then the other thing is that it actually has to have somewhere to sit in the real world, and there has to be plumbing and all those little things that go in there. Now, what's going to happen with this piece in particular, or pretty much any piece that I work on currently, is that it's going to be carved out of 1 pound expanding foam, which is carved out by a robot with a router bit on the end of it. We're currently using I believe it's a 6-axis robot. It's really old. It's like 20 years old, actually probably older. And it kind of has a little bit of an attitude. But thankfully, right now, I'm not the person that programs it, so anything goes wrong, I can blame the engineers. So, um, so what I have here is a little template that we've come up with, and this tells us where our slide zones are. And the important thing with this is that these are based off of standards that are created and set by ASTM, which is an American set of standards that manufacturers try to adhere to make sure that safety is adhered to. It makes sure that kids aren't going to get hurt and all that stuff. So there are safety things to be concerned about with anything that you're going to put out into the public. You want to make sure that kids aren't going to uh, poke their eyes out or get stuck somewhere where they ought not to be. And especially whenever you're dealing with something that's going into water that can get really dangerous really quickly. And so these are all things that you have to be cognizant of, and that I had to learn whenever I started working at the current place that I'm at. So these were some changes that had to be made. I had to widen this out. There has to be a minimum zone for the slide to run through. So if I can turn on transparency and turn on the slide, here's our little slide insert, or that's not what it actually looks like, but it's something comparable, right? But these are all 3D things that come straight from mostly engineered uh, stuff that's actually in existence. So we have our slide insert, we have some mounting locations that we can utilize, and then we have these little rails right here which indicate this is basically says, hey, there's a standard for slides that says, hey, you've got to have a rail that extends up at a minimum of 4 inches along the slide. So basically, so kids don't hop on there and just fall off and hurt themselves, right? And these things, these particular slides, they're not going very fast in the first place, but we still have to be considerate about these things. And so then this is basically just what we use to punch out our slides. And so basically what we'll wind up with is all of this material will basically get obliterated. But we won't do that in ZBrush. We'll do that in Rhino, which is the software of choice that we used for those kinds of functions. So I wanted to just kind of show those things to you. And then we have, you know, how do we measure to see whether or not something is passable as far as safety is concerned? So it depends on what it is that you are making. There are regulations, so there are certain regulations so that anything is like anything that's within 8 feet, uh, like or 8 feet vertical distance or below, has to pass certain requirements. So we have these little things right here, which these little gauges check to see whether or not there is a protrusion that could possibly poke someone's eye out. So you have your 3 inch, 1.5 inch, and I believe that's a half-inch circle. And there's different little sizes that correspond with how far a kind of a bolt or any other thing could stick out. This here is an entrapment tool, and this makes sure it's kind of like roughly the shape of a kid's head. How they wound up at this right here, I don't know, but this is what they say is basically a kid's head and shoulders, right? And so there are tests that they do, and they basically stick this into any partially bounded opening. A partially bounded opening means that there's like some little area. This would be a partially bounded opening where I've got my mouse hovering. And this, if this were to bottom out here in either one of the sides there were to touch, then you have to do a further check to see whether or not the shoulders would get snagged. And basically, you're trying to see whether or not a kid would get his head stuck in there. And clearly, this would certainly pass. You'd have to have a really big kid to fill this, like a giant. And the biggest thing that's actually the most important thing that I use whenever working in these factors is reference. You have to have a reference point to be able to keep everything at the correct scale. So for all of these tools, I'll have a 1 inch reference cube in everything. It's very important to have that because if you don't have a frame of reference, then you're going to be shooting in the dark. So when I have this, I know that I can scale everything else around that. So I can work and shape and move all this stuff around, and as long as this stays where I need it to be, in accordance with all these other things, then we'll be golden. But if I haven't sorted that out, then we're going to run into some issues. Thankfully here I have, and I'm kind of running through this pretty quick, so don't get perturbed by that. So I figured while I'm here, I'm going to take a couple minutes and I'm just going to add some things. I've been working on trying to add some tree materials and stuff like that. So let's turn off transparency and figure that out. Now, one of the ways I was going to go about this is just using the curved brush. I may still do that, but we can also use a Z-sphere. Since I already have this, I'm just going to try and reuse this right here. I'm going to hide part of that, split hidden. And I'm just going to copy it over. I'm holding Control as I drag over. And I don't want both sides to be exactly the same, but this is close enough. And all I'm going to do is just kind of move things around. I don't care how crunchy the geometry gets. We can fix all that stuff later. I just need the base material, or material is probably probably not the best. I need the base forms to be able to kind of give me what I'm looking for. And if it gets crunchy, it's okay. Not a huge deal. Sometimes the snake hook brush is a good alternative to the move. Can give you some better exaggerations. This is going to be pretty cartoony, so any amount of stylization is fine. I'll say any amount. We want to have some so whenever you run into these situations where it like you've pushed it like super hard, and the geometry gets like super wonky, this is not a huge deal. All you got to do is come back with the inflate brush and it'll fix a lot of this. Now, I could go through and do a Dynamesh, but I don't want to do that just yet because I'm not where I want to be with this. Now I'm working with ZBrush 2022. I've yet to upgrade to the current version, but I can guarantee you not a ton has really changed. The functions that I'm doing right now, unless Maxon went through and like did a bunch of changes, all these functions should still be there. Now I can't speak for what's on the tablet. I haven't really dove into any of that yet, but God willing, maybe we'll get there at some point. Alright, so I'm going to drop my intensity on my smooth, just to kind of fix these shapes. What I'm going for here is just kind of a relief. So the other thing that I have to be concerned about whenever I'm making something for a water park or any kind of play structure, I have to be concerned about whether or not kids are going to be able to climb on something, right? Now, there are. It depends on how things are marketed, right? If you're going to go through and call something a quote unquote climber, there are certain things that you have to. All that has to be handled by the company that you work for. You better make sure that that things are squared away with all that, because the moment that everything's good and wonderful until some kid falls and gets hurt, and then the lawyers get involved. So if you've marketed something as a climbable surface, and then all of a sudden it's you got kids practically breaking their necks on it, then you could find yourself in some trouble if it wasn't supposed to be that. Now, there are certain standards. ASTM is one of them, and ASTM says basically, hey, there are tests that they use that basically, I don't have it right in front of me, so don't quote me verbatim, but you measure like a 2x2. You take a little 2x2 flat square, and basically it can't sit flat on that whatever the surface is. So as long as there is a curve to it and it can't sit flat, then it's not technically considered a climbable surface. It's a little more nuanced than that. So, like I said, don't quote me on it. The other thing is that whenever you're dealing with stuff that involves water, you want to make sure that water is able to run off. And the reason why is there's a couple of reasons. One, if you have if you're running water, typically, uh, unless it is a flow through system, flow through basically means that they're not whatever municipality isn't basically conserving water. They will be using what's called a recirculating system, and those systems require that the water be have certain treatments, uh, chlorinations, and things like that. And when you have water buildup and that water contains harsh chemicals like chlorine, then it can damage certain surfaces, and basically it'll wear things down faster than it ought to be. So if you can avoid water buildup, that's really good. The other thing is that even if you have to be concerned about or be considerate about bacteria buildup. So if you have standing water anywhere for any amount of time, you can run the risk of bacteria buildup. So I remember years ago, whenever all these splash pads started becoming all the rage, I didn't even work for any companies that did this stuff, but basically, they started having situations where kids were getting really hurt because um, there was bacteria that would build up, and they were playing out in this stuff, and then all of a sudden they like got water up their nose or something like that, and then they got some brain-eating bacteria up there, and it was because the water wasn't being treated properly, right? And or there was water buildup that contributed to that. And so when you're designing for such things, you have to be mindful of all that. You got to do everything that you can to make sure that there's not going to be any water buildup on there. So as long as you keep it like a low relief and the water is able to go somewhere, uh, gravity should take over, and the sun will also help to make sure that those things don't become massive problems. So, let's see. I'm not going to be on too much longer. We will pick this back up at another point. Right now, I'm just trying to give myself some kind of gnarly tree sort of vibe so that I can go back. I want to add some vines and some leaves and some other stuff. Now this slide, this entire distance is probably about 9 feet, so this thing's going to be pretty sizable. So I think that's probably good. Oops. Want to make that its own polygroup. I'm going to split hidden. Then we'll work on this one a little bit. Just want to push the forms. Just might inflate a little bit. The other thing about processes, right, is that you've got to think down the line, and this requires the designer to know what's going to be coming out of the manufacturing, uh, what's going to be coming out of the manufacturing plant down the line. So when I'm working, I know that I have a certain set of colors that I can work with, and I know that there are going to be different processes like paint and sometimes fiberglass and other things that have to be added to these materials. So I guess I could talk about a little bit well, some of that. So let me gather my thoughts real quick. Okay, so if you're ever walking down a toy aisle, right, and you look at any of the toys that are in the packages, you're going to notice that in all reality, um, unless it's there are going to be a minimum amount of colors that are going to be on whatever that thing is. In most cases, like the cheaper toys, they're going to have like two, three colors tops, and or maybe a little more. But the reason why is because each one of those things represents a different process, and they're trying to crank those things out as quickly as they possibly can because they are interested in making profits, not art. um, so um, that's the reality of the corporate world, right? Now, when I'm designing, I know that I have a few processes down the line. If I'm designing something that's for a splash pad, uh, sometimes it's going to go down and get sprayed with some sort of hard coating that adds for protection. And depending on what it is, sometimes it might get a coating of protection, and it might also get a layer of fiberglass, and then an additional coating of protection. What that means is that this surface will get rounded out and it'll look bloated, right? So you can wind up with sometimes up to a quarter of an inch to a half inch of additional material on top of this. And what happens is that um, it makes it look pretty ugly. So you have to keep those things in mind. So um, if that is going to happen, um, you need to know. I have to talk to my engineers and make sure and find out what the process is actually going to be, and then I can actually reduce the surface by that amount so that whenever those things get added on there, it doesn't look so terrible at the final stages. Another thing is there's um, sometimes it's easier for painters to paint around things that have shape and form than it is for them to go through and try and paint basically a mural on the side of something, right? So if I hand off to my painters this tree, and I'm probably going to put some vines and some leaves and everything like that, um, I don't have to have like it fully defined, but if I can give them enough of a shape that they can paint around, then they can add some artistic embellishments to it and take things even further. Um, so that's another thing that I have to be concerned about whenever I'm going through and designing things for manufacturing. I'm gonna hop over to my live feed and see if there are any questions because I can't see them right now. All right. Okay. Well, so on the next session, I will be adding some vines and some other structures, probably some rock, um, to fill this out. Now, this is going to be going down into a swimming pool, so um, we have to account for the edge of the swimming pool, which is going to come up probably right around here, and cut this off. But I'm going to make this basically a standard product, so that it can be sold as is or as a customized thing. And so just to kind of recap from where we blasted off from, this quick little session, um, where we started was basically just a concept, really rough sculpt that I kind of sketched it out a little bit on my sketch pad, based upon some requests from the customer, and then we took this and then we conformed it around a template that is used to punch out a water slide, just for like little kids and stuff. And in order to do that, um, we had to make some concessions here, just for the sake of the real world, right? Um, so that's where we're at today, and I think we'll try to hop on at some point tomorrow and continue going at this. So thanks for hanging out. Hope you learned something. I threw a ton of information at you. I didn't see a bunch of questions, but that's okay. Next time I'll try to give more of a heads up, and see you next time. All right, folks. Take care.